looking forward to coming into your classroom today. What is it that you're going to be doing when I come in to visit?
I'll be introducing the last unit that they'll be involved in this year. It's an acid-base unit. So the main objective that I have, the chemistry objective that I have for them today initially is, when we get done, hopefully they'll have developed 2 rules. One for being able to identify the formula of acids, and the other to be able to identify the formula for bases.
Right. Now, when you say develop these formulas, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I'm hoping to have them do is actually on their own through technique. I'm going to use concept attainment with this group.
Can I stop for just a second?
Sure.
When you say concept attainment, can you help me understand what you mean by concept attainment?
I'm going to use a series of examples, show them positive examples of, I'll start off with the acids. I'm going to give them a formula for an acid and a formula for something that isn't an acid. Hopefully through doing a series of these, I'll have them find a pattern, and through the pattern be able to verbalize and put together the rules that would allow them to recognize a formula for an acid if they saw it mixed in with a list of other formulas.
Okay. I want to be sure that I capture the key points of your lesson, so I hope you don't mind if I take notes.
Not at all.
Okay. Then what will you do after that?
What I do after that will depend on, while I'm doing that, the interaction that I have with them. Hopefully I'm going to draw some information out of them that will allow them to build those rules. When they get to a point where they have developed the rules, I am going to have them take a look at the appendix of their book to see if they can refine one part of it.
So you'll have them generate or you'll put the list on the board of the acids and the non-acids, and you'll have them try to see a pattern in that.
Correct.
And then you want them hopefully to generate a rule from that pattern. You'll
Yes.
also be using the book at that time?
We will go to the book at the end of that activity.
Okay.
And it will be two sequences that I'll run. I'll go to the book at the end of the activity for acids. I'll do it again after the bases.
Okay.
In between both of those, I am going to have them interact for about a minute or two with each other. I want to make sure that they get a chance to verbalize to one another what they think the rules are. So I'll have them pair up at that, and this is an activity they'll be familiar with. They do it all the time. At that point, I'll get a chance to go out and listen to one or two of them interact.
How will you know if the students are getting this as you go along?
During the interaction, nonverbal cues that I may get from them, nodding, eye contact with myself and the board, watching them go from, they'll have to refer to the periodic charts. Now, I have one in the front of the room, one in the back of the room. They also have them in their text. So if I see some students, as they're developing their hypotheses, referring to those, I'll know they're still engaged. I also use signaling techniques, and when I start and periodically throughout the lesson, I'll ask them to give me indications if they understand, or give me indications when they have developed a hypothesis.
What signaling techniques do you use?
I use a thumbs up, thumbs down technique.
Okay.
Probably what I'll do after I put the first exemplars on the board.
Okay.
I'll ask them to develop a hypothesis based on what they see, even though I've only revealed one exemplar to them, one example of each. I'll still ask them to develop a hypothesis and simply give me an indication when they have developed that hypothesis. And I'll wait at that point until I see a thumbs up from every student. That means they've all at least thought about something that deals with what I put on the board. Then I'll go from there and give them 2 or 3 more and ask them just to continue to indicate as long as their hypothesis holds up. After maybe 3 or 4 examples, I'll ask some of them to verbalize their hypothesis. And then how I work from there will depend on how they respond.
Will they be able to change that initial hypothesis as you put up more examples on the board?
I'll expect them to do that. They'll know that hypotheses should be changed if they don't fit.
So you are expecting that after you put one exemplar on the board, they'll form an initial hypothesis. And as you continue to put those on, that they may change the original hypothesis, or in fact they may change it several times.
They might.
Okay.
They might end up with the first hypothesis holding up all the way through.
Right. And it sounds like you've anticipated what some of these hypotheses might be on the part of the students.
I've tried to anticipate some of them. That's right.
Okay.
As I say, I won't know until we actually go through. They may come up with some others.
So your exemplars have taken that anticipation into account?
Yes, they have.
Okay. Okay. And at the end of the period, then, you will know whether they have attained these rules by doing what?
When we've completed with going through both the acid and the base exemplars, they have verbalized, or we've talked about the rules. There are times that I will go to the board and say, all right, let's put them together. I'll write some information on the board. They'll refine it. They'll change it around. They'll come up with one good statement. Then, if you'll note, you can look at the board when you go out there, you'll see I have 3 objectives listed up there. One of them is to be able to develop the rules that they can use for the acid and the base. A second one is to be able to, from a list of formulas, pick out those that are acids, formulas for acids, and those that are formulas for bases. So one of the checks I will use is I will give them a list of about 10 formulas. I'm going to ask them to look at the list and decide, first of all, which formulas on the list indicate bases, and hold up a number of fingers that indicates how many formulas on that list of 10 are bases.
Okay, so you're going to use this as a checking point.
Another signal technique, but
All
mainly
right.
mainly a check right now for me. If I
Okay.
see everybody up there with 2 and there were 2 bases, I can say they know there were 2 up there. I will assume at that point that they've picked the correct 2. I'm not positive, but I'll assume that.
Okay.
I'll do the same thing for the acids.
So you'll do that both with the acids and the bases?
Yes.
They won't be talking to each other at that
No.
time?
And then whether I do the next step or not will depend on how I feel that they have developed the rules to that point. I might ask them to use their appendix in the back of the book and techniques that they've already learned to write 2 or 3 formulas that could possibly be for acids and could possibly be for bases. So I'd ask them to use the rules to see if they could actually write formulas. I'm not sure whether I'll do that or not.
Okay, so you're saying that depends on how what you've already
My
described takes
feeling-
place?
Right. My
Okay.
feeling about where I think they are at that particular point.
Okay. So there are several cues that you're looking for then from your class. The signals that you've talked about, what they say during the interaction, you've talked about eye contact, and several kinds of things that will help you determine your pace and what you need to do then in the lesson as you go.
Right. Correct.
Okay. Okay. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier that there was something that you'd like me to look for. What is it that you'd like me to do today when I'm in your classroom?
One of the things I'd like you to do is watch what happens with the examples, with the exemplars. As I say, concept attainment, I don't use the technique that much. It's not an easy one for me to develop because I have to go through all the possibilities of how I'm going to reveal and what examples I'm going to give. So I'm not sure how it's going to work. If you could watch the interaction of the students and involvement, engagement with me, and listen to the questions that I use as I'm trying to involve or elicit more information from the students on the possible hypotheses or their hypotheses.
I hear you saying to listen for your questions, and I also hear you saying to listen or look at the students and their engagement. Let's talk about the engagement for a moment. If students are engaged from your point of view, what would I see them doing?
Should see them leaning forward, the body movement positioned, facing where the activity is going on, which would be that side board, so they're not turned halfway around. Mainly their eye contact is over there. They are have body movements that indicate if they hear a hypothesis from the other end of the room. Yeah.
Okay,
I
so
had that one.
head nodding.
So head
too.
nodding would be an
Okay.
activity, would be their actual verbal interaction, being involved verbally in what's happening.
Now, when you say, let me tell you what I have here from what you've listed so far. You've said leaning forward, facing the activity, whether it would be you speaking or whether the board, looking at the board at that point
Or
in
turning
time.
to another student. If another student is responding, they might completely turn around, and you can tell they're engaged with what's being said by a classmate.
So turning to students who are responding would also
Yes,
signal
it would.
engagement to you, too. Okay, eye contact, head nodding, and then you mentioned verbal interaction. When you say verbal interaction, are you talking about the discussions that people will be having with each other as you set that up?
Yes.
And I'm wondering what it is that you're interested in about your questions. What did you want to know about those?
Specifically, the type of questions that I use to try to draw information out of the students. I may not have to use many questioning strategies depending on how their hypotheses develop.
So you would like to have a record of the questions that you ask?
Yes.
So I can simply write down the
Write down
questions
the
that you
questions
ask?
and response, I guess the questions I ask and any responses to those questions that I receive. I definitely would like to see those.
Okay.
Yes.
Record questions and responses. Now, let's see. You'd like both of those things. Maybe we could do it this way. I could record the key questions, or the key words out of the questions that you ask, and record the responses that I hear from students at that time. Once again, key words, because I won't be able to write down
That'd be
every
fine.
word that's said. And in addition to that, I could note at certain times, like every 3 to 5 minutes, I could note the time on the clock, and I could record the student behaviors that I see at that time, specifically looking for what you've said, leaning forward, facing the activity, eye contact, head nodding, and so on. Does that sound like that would give you a record of what you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay. Are there times during the period where engagement is very critical to you?
There'll be a couple times when the engagement will be critical. One will be during the first example sequence, that the acid sequence right there, their engagement at that point. That is a more difficult rule to develop than the base one. The second one will be the final thing that we do. I'm going to ask them to write a 25-word precis that combines these two rules and allows them to distinguish the two. The involvement at that time. If students are able to just start writing and not have they're going to have to think a little bit, but those students that within the first minute are starting to put something down on their paper, that's going to tell me a lot about whether they are comfortable enough with what they have developed during the class. If I have a number of them that are sitting there just doing pencil chewing and not sure what to write down, I've missed something, and I'm going to have to go back and do some re-input later on.
So you want me to notice if they start writing immediately. It sounds like that's an important point to you.
At that particular time, yes. That's right.
All right. I think I can do that.
All right.
Great, Lloyd. I'm looking forward to the lesson. I'll see
So
you
am
at
I.
10 o'clock.
See you then, Marilyn. HCl, a non-acid. NaCl. Right now, formulate some hypothesis, some statement in your mind of a rule that would identify the formula for an acid. When you have that hypothesis, give me an indication that you have one formulated. Okay? Okay? I'll give you a second example. An acid, HI, a non-acid, LII. Now, continue to give me an indication if your hypothesis is still working. Reformulate a hypothesis if you need to. If you find what you thought was a good hypothesis isn't working, put together some other hypothesis. Try it out. Another example of an acid. Non-acid. Okay, I see some of you still have hypotheses that you're claiming are good hypotheses. Any of you willing to share your hypothesis? Bill?
Okay, acids contain hydrogen.
Okay,
And
hypothesis
don't.
that acids contain hydrogen. Anyone else with a hypothesis right now? Travis?
Non-acids do not contain hydrogen.
So you're saying an inverse of what Phil said,
Yeah.
non-acids don't contain hydrogen? Okay. Do any others have a hypothesis that's similar to Phil's? Do you indicate if you do? Any others similar to Travis's? Let's check both of them. I'll give you another example up here. You can check your hypotheses to see if they work, they're still working, or do you have to start put together something else? Here's another example of an acid. Example of a non-acid. Travis and Phil specifically, check your hypotheses with these two examples. How's your hypothesis doing, Phil?
Well, on the, so far my part has gone great because of the acids and stuff, but on the non-acids it has hydrogen in there.
Does the fact that a non-acid showed up, a hydrogen showed up in a non-acid affect your hypothesis?
No.
Connie?
All the non-acids have an element from the first group in the periodic table.
So you're looking at the periodic table in the first group up there, the group of metals that are over on the left-hand side, and so far you're seeing some consistency in the non-acids.
Right.
Okay. Remember, you're trying to develop a rule for identifying the formula for an acid. So you're going to be comparing the examples to the non-examples that we give, the acids to the non-acids, trying to find some consistency. Let me put some more examples up here of acids and non-acids. I'll put 3 or 4 more. See if there's any pattern that continues, if any of your hypotheses continue to work. See if there's any extension, addition, or modification that you're going to make to the hypothesis. Okay, here are some other, I'll put several examples, as I said right now. Acid, non-acid, acid, non-acid. What are you absolutely sure of about an acid right now that you think from all the examples you've seen? Connie?
They all contain hydrogen.
Okay. One part of identifying the formula for an acid is that you have hydrogen contained in all acids. But there's another critical attribute. So the next thing I want you to do is take a look at these examples. Is there something else that these examples, positive examples of acids, have in common that you can add to or attach to your hypothesis that you have right now?
Besides the hydrogen, they all contain a nonmetal.
Okay, so you're seeing that every one of these up here has nonmetals involved
Yeah.
in them. All right?
The hydrogen in the acid column, they're acting with a positive valence charge, and then when it does occur on the non-acids, isn't it acting with a negative charge?
You're saying then you remember some things that we talked about before about oxidation states or valence numbers when you write equations, write formulas.
And that hydrogen can act with a positive charge or a negative charge.
So you're saying that you're noticing that in acids, the hydrogen is acting with a positive charge as it goes together with, as Kim said, nonmetals.
Right.
Okay? At this point, I would like you to open up to the appendix of your book, appendix 2. It's on page 446, please. Where you've got your anions and cations. Taking what Phil, Connie, Craig, Travis, and the rest of you responded, taking that information that you put together, you've kind of put together some information that says, yes, I'm going to see hydrogen in acids. That hydrogen has a positive valence charge when it's in acids. Kim said she notices that there's something common about acids, that nonmetals show up all the time. Would you look down the list under Appendix 2? See if you can take that information about hydrogen and nonmetals and refine it or say something more specific based on what you see in the columns right there, the table. Is there any information or anything that you've come up with looking at the columns that allow you to refine your definition right now, or your rule that you're trying to put together. Carousel, you had something you shared with me, so would you be willing to share that?
Like Craig said, besides hydrogen, like all the chemicals like Cl and I, iodine and fluorine, they all have negative charges.
Okay, they're all in that anion side of that chart, negative charges. Tracy?
Acids are all anions, and so far most of the non-acids you've shown us are cations. So the acids by themselves are in a neutral state.
Okay, so you're noticing that
The non-acids have a charge.
this non-metal side, or that portion that's attached to the positive hydrogen that you found you have in common with the acids, seems to consistently be an anion, or an anion group. Phil?
Okay, I noticed that the charges cancel out each other, so they're neutral.
Yes, and as you've learned before, when you write formulas, you want the positive and negative charges to neutralize. It's one of the rules we followed earlier in the year, and we continue to follow when we write formulas. Would you take about 60 seconds to see if you can put together a statement with a partner that you think would allow you to identify a formula for an acid anytime you see it? So just interact with a partner about some sort of statement that you'd have for that. I haven't listened to you, so go ahead.
Balance out.
When you say they are all negatively charged, what specifically are you using?
The ones that were reacting with hydrogen, the negative ions
The negative ions that are reacting
with hydrogen.
with hydrogen. Okay,
So hydrogen has to be positive in all the acids.
all right, and it'll be combined with
Be combined with a negative ion,
just one negative ion,
or as many as you need to balance it out.
or as many as you need to balance it out. So, can you make one statement there that you think would...
Yeah, you stick in as many hydrogen ions as you need to balance out the equation. And the hydrogen has to be positive.
Okay, let's see what happens when you write that, put that down and write together.
It's HCO3 right there.
Would you look at
For the non-acid?
But you said H was negative there, right? Is that what you're
more than
saying?
two elements?
It really isn't.
Yes, it is. Because
Within that ion itself, H is positive. A positive H has to combine with a negative CO3.
HCO3 on the anion side has a negative charge, and then it would
The
go
whole thing
with
altogether.
the sodium charge. It has a plus one, so it would be charged.
Okay, the whole thing altogether is negative. The hydrogen itself isn't negative, so you can't
It
see
can
it.
be.
Where do you
It's-
want me to
It does. It occurs both ways.
CO3 is negative, and when H goes with CO3, it doesn't neutralize it because
It's a whole different combination.
Yeah, it does. It neutralizes it. H2CO3.
H can be
HCO3,
negative.
HCO3 is a negative ion, but the H part is positive and the CO3 part is negative.
How are you saying that?
There's more CO3, there's more charge in the CO3 that's negative. That's what makes it a
They're
negative
both
ion.
right here.
Yeah, but you can't say that H is always positive. I mean negative. I mean, H is always positive only in an acid, because it's also positive right there in that non-acid.
It's not positive though.
It isn't because it combines with a
The
CO3.
sodium is combining
Yeah, with
the
H, the
HCO3.
ion is.
The whole H3O3 is combining with the sodium.
Greg, can I ask you a question? Specifically, what is it that you're trying to share
We're
with
trying to
me?
see if
Non-acid, the
in the acid is the
negative.
is the hydrogen molecule always a cation.
Anion.
And we want to put that in our rule if it works.
No, he's saying that is a hydrogen ion always acting as a positive ion, which is a
Yeah.
cation.
In the acid.
In the acid.
Acid, yeah, that's true.
You have to specify when you're saying H is always positive. You have to say it's the H ion or something, because if you say H is always positive in an acid, you're just saying any old H.
Okay.
And look at the non-acid.
A
Yeah.
H cation is always positive.
And the
If all of you would take a look at the appendix, I'm breaking out of this a little bit here.
It's got to be.
On your anion side, notice that the charges that are listed there are for the groups. For the whole thing together, right. So you're looking at groups right there. You've looked at those before. What is it that you notice, by the way, so we can come together on this and go on? What is it you notice if you look at just the examples of acids up here that have 3 elements in them? What else do you notice?
The two elements that are not hydrogen form an anion.
Correct. The two elements that are not hydrogen form anions that you'll find listed right there in your appendix. Travis, you want to add something to that?
Oxygen is always one of the other elements in the anion when
Okay.
combined with hydrogen.
That is true also. When you've got a three-element acid, the second non-metal that combines that anion group will be oxygen. Hold that thought. We'll come back to that rule later. Let's see what you can do with the bases. Your objective for today is just to be able to identify rules and use rules for acids and bases. Okay, let's go bases and non-bases. Let me give you some examples here. And then have you, again, build your hypotheses. Again, I'm going to ask you to give me an indication after the first example when you have a hypothesis formed. Okay, positive example of a base. This is a base. Non-base. Got a hypothesis? Let me know. Just give me an indication. Okay, check it. Here's another example. Base. Non-base. Several hypotheses are still standing here. Give you another one. Base. Non-base. Somebody want to verbalize a hypothesis? What you think? I got a lot of you, huh? Margie.
A base has to have a hydroxide in it.
What do you
Hydroxide and ion.
What do you consider the hydroxide group?
OH.
OH. So that's your hypothesis there. Okay. Connie?
The hydroxide is reacting with the cation.
So you're saying Margie has said hydroxide she sees contained here, and you're saying that hydroxide is reacting with a cation.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
So far, all the bases have the oxide molecule reacting with an element from the first group in the periodic table.
So you find that so far these cations that Connie mentioned are all from the first group. Travis?
All of the cations that are reacting are also metals with the hydroxide.
So far, all the cations are metals. They're reacting with the hydroxide. Okay, you've got some hypotheses. Let's compare several of these that you've already shared with some other examples. I'll put 3 or 4 more other examples and non-examples. Let you take a look, see if there's verification that you have. Base, non-base. How do these next examples fit your hypotheses? Do they work or not? Just give me an indication. Several of you saying yes. Got a couple of you that aren't sure. So right down here in the corner down here, Trace or Travis or Craig.
Until we got to the Fe cation, OH was a single molecule. There was only one OH molecule with the Na, Li, and K, which is in the first group of the metals.
One OH
the
group
first
there.
column. When you came to the second column, OH gained another molecule for the second column.
Another
Then
group.
Fe went over to how far over? It's 26, and then OH only went to 3, so that kind of broke our thing right there.
What was your hypothesis?
We were saying that as the metals went over in the column, the OH was gaining a molecule in each column. So
Did you modify your hypothesis to include the FeOH3?
Yeah, we still have it reacting with the OH molecule, the OH anion, and it's still reacting with metals.
Okay, looking at what you have up here, would you take about 60 seconds to share with a partner what you think the critical attributes are that allow you to build this rule for the bases? Do that for a minute. I have not heard, I know, right here. Go ahead, I haven't heard you guys.
That's -1 times 3. That's -3. It had to balance it, that's why.
So those three right there. About that.
The OH3 is the positive or the negative?
Both of those statements are
Then
true. Okay, we come back together now. Now, right now you've all got together, you've interacted. I've heard some of you, you've put together what you think are rules that allow you to identify an acid formula or a base formula if you saw them in a group, at least hopefully. I'm going to show you a group of 10 formulas. And I want you to look at them, and I'm going to ask you to respond in a particular way to them. Okay, so if you take a look up here at the sheet. This is what I want you to do. First of all, find the acid formulas, hold up the number of fingers that indicate how many acid formulas you see there. As soon as you've identified the number of acid formulas, just hold up your fingers, tell me how many acid formulas you see. You get a response from everyone. You can also check class data with other classmates. Okay, if you have 3, you're correct. There are 3 acids up there. I won't ask you what they are right now. I'm going to assume right now you have picked out the correct 3. Would you do the same with the bases? Okay. All right. Bases, you'll find 2. Does anyone have any question about those that you just selected? How many of you think you could identify acids and bases, just the formulas, from any list I would give you? We'll check that again tomorrow. Finally, what I would like you to do is take the piece of paper that you've been working on, just turn it to the other side. Would you write a 25-word precis? We want to use French? Okay. A 25-word précis that combines the 2 rules so that you can distinguish them. Would you do that right now? Make sure your name's on that. I'll pick them up from you. How many of you can complete this in another minute? Give me an indication if you can. Okay, 1 more minute. Okay, would you pass those up to your précis up to the front, please? Once you've passed those up to the front, would you give me your attention over here at the sideboard for just about 30 seconds? I just want to go over the homework assignment for you.
How do you think it went, Lloyd?
I'm not sure yet. I think I have to talk it through a little bit. I think it went well. I got back from the students during the focus, during that first 3 minutes in that interaction. I got back from the students what I expected to get back from this group, that they wouldn't have any specific gross misconceptions about acids and bases. When we started to do the exemplars, though, and I went over and was attempting to draw out or get them to develop the rules, I felt as though, at least at one point, that I was losing them. I had the feeling, I don't know what you were saying, I had the feeling that I was talking with or working with only about 5 or 6 students.
What did they do that made you feel that way?
As I looked around the classroom, I felt as though I stopped losing eye contact and involvement.
What did you do when you found out that some of the students weren't with you or that they weren't on the track you wanted them to be on?
What I wanted to do was try to include some other, I think you noticed I tried to specifically draw some others in by calling on them.
Did you do anything else to capture the kids the way that you wanted them to go?
Only other thing I can remember that I did was alter my physical position. I tried to move my position a little bit away from the board towards some of this. I tried to walk, you notice I tried to walk into the desk a couple times and lean across and specifically make eye contact with someone to see if I could draw them back in.
So those changes that you put in your strategy, did they work? Were they successful?
I don't feel they were that successful at that point. When they started to write later on, the precis, I felt better about it as I walked around.
Are you saying that you didn't see the kind of involvement from your students that you wanted to see until they were writing the precis?
That's correct. When we went through that first exemplar system series with the acid and bases, with the acids, as I said, I'd lost a few students. When I started to walk around and watch them working on the precis, most of them right away were starting to write, and the 4 or 5 that I was concerned about when I started to read or just scanned a few of the things that they'd written down, they were all right. They were on the money with the rules.
Now, when you go back and replay the lesson again, what kinds of involvement did you see on the part of the students? Let's go back to perhaps where you first started recording on the board. What did you see the kids doing at that time?
They signaled when I asked them to signal. I saw they were looking at the board. They were responding by turning toward me. I saw them. I could see thinking going on, I guess. The wrinkled brow, when I said form a hypothesis, I saw defocused looks, I saw students go retrieve information, going down, going up, and so I saw most of them involved in that. They all got started at that point.
And a little bit later on, at another point in the lesson, maybe midway through, what are some of the things you saw your students doing then?
Starting to disengage.
Okay.
I had some disengagement that was going on at that point.
What did you see that made you think it was disengagement?
Sitting back, like I'm almost saying to me, I'm kind of tired right now with this, or I'm not quite as involved now as I was before.
Would you say that during the course of your lesson that you had the kind of eye contact that you were looking for most of the time?
Yes, I would.
Okay. All right. What were some of the other things that you were looking for that signaled engagement to you?
When I had them break up into pairs. Okay, they'd interact in pairs. There was a lot of involvement then. You noticed at one time you had the group in the back, Travis, Craig, Anita, Andy, when they got together. There was a lot of discussion for several minutes back there on the hydrogen ion and the anions and how they related. And what about the hydrogen in the anions that I see on this side of the appendix? What about the hydrogen ion in the acid and the charges that they carry? So there's quite a bit of interaction was going on. That was good interaction. You notice I leaned over and I tried to see if I could do some sort of clarifying on the question, because some of it, what Anita was discussing, did not have to do with the objective. It had a lot to do with chemistry and a lot to do with acids and bases, but not with the specific objective. And Craig was with the objective, but he was having trouble bridging what Anita was saying. So I was hoping to come to, I don't feel as though I satisfactorily closed with them on that, and I consciously decided not to continue to probe with it, but I tried to get them to get to some point where they were comfortable enough to come back to the class activity.
When you go back and rerun the lesson, at what points during the lesson did you get the most involvement from your students? Let me ask that in another way. What were you doing at different points in the lesson when you saw the most involvement on behalf of your students?
The one-on-one interaction. When they were signaling at the beginning, when they were taking the 3 minutes to write down their information, the pre-information or information that they thought they knew about acids and bases. When I dropped the 10 formula list and asked them to indicate how many bases and how many acids that they saw there, I felt they were all involved at that particular point. I could see that.
Okay, so you're saying that when you have students write, when you had students signal, when you had students interact one-on-one, meaning with one another, that's when you saw the kind of involvement that you were looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
You know, earlier on, we had talked about the objectives for your lesson, and you had 3 objectives today. Did you feel that the students were able to meet those objectives that you had planned for them?
2 of them, yes. I can say I wanted to definitely from being able, one of the objectives was to have them pick the formulas for acids and bases from a list of formulas. As that objective stood, I felt very comfortable that they did do that. Every student, with the exception of one, was able to draw that information up there when we went to the chart. Developing the rules, I feel 90% sure that most of the class did do that successfully. And then finally, as I walked around, too, as I said, once again, when I looked over their shoulders, when they were writing the preces. There were 6 or 7 of them I knew for sure were all right because I consciously had read more than just a couple of sentences. The rest I'll know when I pick up the preces tonight.
When you do the reading.
And look at them tonight.
Yeah.
Right, and then I'll come
You've
back
really
tomorrow.
gathered a lot of information that shows you that your students were able to meet 2 of the objectives.
Yes.
Okay, and it sounds like you made a decision during the course of the lesson about that other objective.
I decided not to get them involved in that. Yeah, the other objective was to have them actually see if they could take the rules using their past knowledge of how to use a periodic table and oxidation states or valences, and be able to write, actually put together what would be acceptable or possible formulas for acids and bases. Not that they would actually be ones that exist in nature, but ones that would fit all the rules and legally say, if it could exist, it would exist like this.
What was it that caused you to drop that objective from the lesson today?
I thought it was one objective one step beyond where I wanted to go. That I felt comfortable. I didn't feel totally comfortable where they were, all right? If I had thought that, we were closing down the period. We were real close to the end. If I tried to put that in, I don't think it would have linked up as far as a learning link well enough with the other material right at that point. I'd be introducing something just a little bit new, and I was a little bit afraid I might precipitate and lose some of what they had. And since I wasn't sure, if we had 10 or 15 minutes left in the period, and they were well grounded in those first 2 objectives, then I would spring to that. So what I'll do tomorrow when I come back is we'll take a few minutes for kind of a quick review.
Lloyd, you had asked me to gather some data for you that you wanted to look
Yes.
at. Would you like to see that now?
Yes, I would.
Okay. There were some things that were extremely important to you that related to the engagement of your students. And you had asked me to look for specific behaviors on their part that would indicate to you that they were engaged. And you also were concerned about your questions. You were interested in seeing what kinds of questions you asked, the type that you asked, and you were interested in student responses.
Yes.
Okay, let me lay out the data here for
All
you.
right.
Now here, about 10:27, you had your focused discussion. This is a check mark that indicates that every student in your classroom had eye contact with you. Here again, they had eye contact with you. This shows that they were all facing the teacher as you were speaking. All were facing the teacher. Is this starting to make some kind of
Yes,
sense?
it is.
Okay.
Yes.
Here you were over at the side of the room explaining the acids and non-acids on the board. And at that
Still
time,
contact,
you
okay.
started, everyone had eye contact with you, and then a bit
4 of them were
later-
writing something.
And I was able to go around later on and look at the papers. And what I saw in the papers looked like notes. What they were writing had to do with the topic.
Had something to do with chemistry.
Something to do with chemistry,
Okay.
yes. You indicated 2 very important areas to you. The first was when you gave the first example in the sequence of acids. So this is what happened when you did that. You asked your students to formulate some hypotheses in their
Right.
mind. You had everyone eye contact. Everyone responded with a thumbs up on your first example. Okay? And it goes on.
Yes, okay.
Now,
Fine.
you were concerned about the number of students who would be involved in the discussion, and what I noticed was that all 16 were involved in the discussion, and I also wrote down that they went into groups and they began their discussion within 1 to 2 seconds after
Oh.
you gave that
Oh, I
direction.
didn't realize that. All right.
And there's another time that you had the discussion going, here. And at this time, you had also 2 triads and 5 dyads. And once again, all your groups were formed and began their discussion within 1 to 2 seconds.
All right.
Generally speaking, you see other kinds of things here, like 7 students at a time looking at a student who responded, taking notes, thumbs up, people talking with one another on task about the topic. So there was a good deal of involvement from that point of view.
No, I hadn't realized at that point there was that much involvement. That get a much
Okay.
better feeling about what went on, and I didn't notice that.
Okay. This is the closure of your lesson, and this is after you'd gone to the charts, asking your students to hold up the number of fingers. 15 held up 3 fingers on your first question, 5 were checking around the room to see what
Good.
other students had done.
That's what I wanted them to do.
3 were holding up 3 fingers, and 12 were holding up 2 fingers on the second question. When you asked how many could identify the formula tomorrow, 15 thumbs out of 16 went up. You had indicated that the precis was an important point to you.
Yes, I did.
And at that time, you gave the direction to your students to write, and within 3 seconds, 14 of your students were writing. Within 6 seconds, all of your students were writing. And when you asked how many can complete this in 1 minute after they had been writing for some time, 8 hands went up at that question. Now, after you've had a brief chance to look over the data, and I know you want to spend a little bit more time with
Yes,
it
I
later
do.
on, what can you say about the level of involvement that you see on the part of your students?
First of all, after you went through this, it was a lot more than I thought I had. If you recall when we started, I said there was one time there where I thought I'd lost a number of them.
Mm-hmm.
According to the indications that you have there, I didn't lose as many as I thought I had.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me feel good.
Okay.
I was pleased with that.
Now, what is it you think you did that kept those students involved?
Oh.
I want to ask that again. What is it that you did that kept your student involved?
I'm not sure. The interaction that I had, that I didn't disengage with them, that I continued to probe or ask them questions. I didn't. The major thing that comes to my mind right away is I didn't get frustrated. I didn't get frustrated and short-circuit what they were doing. Okay, that's enough. Let me tell you the rule. This is the rule. I kept it open. I tried to keep, that's one thing that was going through my mind consciously. Keep it low-key. I wish that they were picking this up a little quicker, but I'm not going to change what I'm going to do. I'm going to carry it through. And because I've learned in the past, if I give them a little more time and also wait a little longer, they'll still respond.
Are you saying then that you're finding that by hanging in there and giving them the time to do the things that you had set out to do with them in your strategy, that your strategy of concept attainment was successful in meeting your objectives?
I now feel it was, yes.
Okay, okay. Now, I'd like to ask a couple more things. Now that you've had an opportunity to be through this process of supervision, what do you think about the process?
I love it. For me, well, I have to speak for myself. I need to bounce information off people. I need to talk with colleagues, with professionals, with other individuals who know what's going on in a classroom.
Okay.
It works very well for me.
If there were one thing that you were going to select from the lesson today that you wanted to carry forward to the next lesson, something that you've learned or gained from it, what would that be?
Today, when in doubt, let the students interact with each other more. Be patient and give them the time to process information together. I guess that's the main thing with it.
You know, as a supervisor, I also like some feedback, and perhaps you could give me some feedback about my role. Could you identify one thing for me that you found that was most useful to you today that I did with you?
I guess there were a couple. First of all, I wasn't that sure the lesson went that well as far as engagement was concerned. You've told me it did. Also, as you gave me back information. Well, in the pre-conference, there were a couple times when you fed back information to me that caused me to decide on altering a couple of things that I did.
Oh.
One of them was I changed a couple of exemplars or examples that I used. Just as I was talking to you, as you were asking me some things about specifically, if you recall, specifically how I used some of the examples or how I was going to use them and what sequence I was going to do, I realized that one of them or two of them I was going to change for a particular reason.
Okay.
So I made those changes consciously when I was up there because of that.
I appreciate the opportunity to be in your classroom today, Lloyd. Thank you for the visit.
I really appreciated it, too. It was very effective for me. Thank you.
And I want to leave all the notes here for you to have. You can look at those later on.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Okay.